4570. All right, now that I have your attention, I was going to start with a cold open, but I think I'm just going to start with a story instead about me with a 4570 because my cold open that I wrote was kind of weird and not really very hooking for a video about the history of 4570. So, I have a buddy who has a lever action 4570. It's a Marlin. I was actually supposed to get it for this video, but he went out of town and I forgot to go get it. So we went out shooting it for the first time because he inherited it and he had not shot it yet. So he went out and bought a bunch of bullets for it, or a bunch of rounds for it. We went out to the deer lease and got ready to start shooting it. And most of the boxes were subsonic loads, weaker loads. So we were shooting it and it was going well and everything. And it's got a LPVO on it, which is like a short range scope, no objective lens. I mean, it has one, but it's tiny. Anyway, but none of us had noticed that it was a little too far back on the scope, or on the gun. So he had the Leverlution rounds, which are the hot rounds you can get from Hortity. And I said, what are those? Because I was loading it up because I was about to shoot it. And he said, oh, these are the hot loads. And I was like, all right, well, give me one. I want to shoot one. So I loaded up a bunch of subsonics, and then I loaded one of them in there. And so I go to shoot, I'm shooting, and it's going great and everything. And then I get around to the Leverlution load. And it, boom! I mean, and the scope barely touches my eyebrow. And I was like, okay, that had to have been me. I was getting overconfident, getting cocky with the subsonics, and forgot that these guns have some recoil. So I was like, give me one more, and I'm going to load it in there, and I'm going to hold on to it and see if it does it again. See if I scope myself again. Well, I get in there, and I hold it tight, nice and tight. And I squeeze off that trigger, and I think the entire back end of the scope touched my eye and felt like I got punched in the face. And I was so mad. I was like, oh my God. I was trying that time, and I still hurt myself. So I go to look at it, and yeah, the scope is like, this is a 30-30. The scope was like back here. And none of us had noticed. So when I shot, it nailed me in the freaking eye. And so then I told my other buddies, I was like, y'all shoot it. Tell me if you feel the same way. Oh, so when they go to shoot it, since they've already learned from me, they shot like this. And then they shot and they were like, oh man, that is a lot of kick. And I was like, yeah, but you didn't have to go through what I did because you're not an idiot. So anyway, that's the story of me with a 4570, the first time I ever shot one, actually. And now that I think about it, I think the only time I've shot a 4570. But it was fun. I did enjoy shooting the gun. I like the gun. I don't know, it's weird. Like they have on those, this is a Marlin too, but on the 4570s, the tube is a little bit shorter, and for some reason it just looks so good to me. I don't know why. I love this gun too. I mean, I love it. I've had it for a long time. I shot at a deer with it. I missed it, but it was also like my third time shooting the gun. I didn't really get to anyway, no more excuses. But so that's that. So how do you do, folks, and welcome back to Chambered in History, where we're going over the story of cartridges that made history themselves. From back of the drawer relics to big bore bruisers, we're cracking open the brass cases and spilling out the history. Now, before we get started, I know I skipped last week's video, and I am sorry about that. I do have a couple reasons for why I skipped last week. Now, these aren't excuses. I just figure y'all deserve honesty. If any of you have been sitting around waiting for my videos, you deserve some honesty. So, first of all, as you can tell by the way my voice sounds, I was sick, and I just did not have it in me to do a video. So, that's one reason. And two, when I was writing the script, I was kind of having like a writer's block and couldn't come up with anything to me that sounded worth a crap. And felt like I wasn't including enough, and felt like I was missing a bunch of stuff, and just what I was writing was just junk. I had good bones, but I mean, it was just crap. So I decided, you know what, I'm just going to skip, and I'll just take a little bit longer and get a good episode out, because I think that's what's most important. So I have wrote up this script, and I think it's a little bit better. Like I said, I didn't like the cold open. I don't know if y'all even like the cold opens. Let me know if you like the cold opens, but I wanted to give it a little bit more time and make sure I got a good video out.
Oh, also forgot to mention, this past weekend I went and spent some time with Sad Daddy Outdoors, or Bill with Sad Daddy Outdoors. There are a couple of buddies of mine, and they started their own YouTube channel. It's about hunting. Right now they're kind of doing it locally, but eventually they're going to be doing a lot of out-of-state stuff. So if that's something y'all be interested in, please go check them out. It's Sad Daddy Outdoors. This is the logo right here, or the channel. So yeah, just figured I'd let y'all know. Go check them out.
And last but not least, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date on all of our cartridge adventures. So now that we have all that out of the way, let's get started on today's cartridge, the 4570 Government. Today, we're going over one of the most iconic American-made cartridges ever devised. I know a lot of you have been waiting for this episode, and I've been excited to get to this episode, so I hope I don't disappoint. Now, something I would like to preface for this video is that the Springfield Armory that we're going to be talking about in this video is not, I repeat, not the same Springfield Armory that exists today that sold you your Hellcat. They are two completely different entities that only share a name and, I think, a logo. And the reason I'm prefacing this, you'll learn why whenever we eventually get to the episode about the 5.56 or 223 in the far future. Probably pretty far. But if you want to learn about it early, go watch Wendigoon's video that he did on the M16. I think it's called Did America Sabotage Its Soldiers in Vietnam or something weird like that. The video is amazing. I learned so much whenever I watched it, and I was blown away by it. It's like an hour and something long. It is both very interesting and sad, and it will teach you exactly why we need to differentiate the two companies. Because they were kind of big fat jerks that both directly and indirectly cost American lives over in Vietnam. But with all that out of the way, let's get started on this legendary round that we know and love. Developed in 1872 by Springfield Armory and eventually produced in 1873, the 4570 would be the round that replaced the 5070 for the U.S. government. While yes, the 5070 was a great round, it was hard-hitting and accurate and very effective while it was in service, the U.S. government decided it lacked in three areas: penetration, accuracy, and range. They wanted to go for something new. So Springfield Armory winded up coming up with our beloved 4570 government cartridge to use in their brand new 1873 Springfield trapdoor, otherwise known as a Springfield number 99, but more on that rifle later, dubbing it the 4570-405. And though I haven't really touched on it very much in our previous episodes, this was a very common way to name cartridges, because if you noticed, I said three numbers. A lot of times they would number cartridges by their caliber, their powder charge, and then the bullet weight, because they didn't have nearly as many options for bullet weights like we do today. Like I think like my 6.5, I can get anywhere from a 95 grain to like 150 grain, 150 something grain. Yeah, I think. So you can't name a cartridge by its weight too, or you'd have an endless amount of cartridge names and every caliber would have 700 different cartridges. But yeah, so we never really touched on that, but that is how they kind of named cartridges back then. This new round and rifle combination was considered to be very accurate and powerful for the time, quickly gaining popularity amongst its users. And though the 1873 Springfield was the first rifle chambered in 4570, it most certainly was not the last, also more on that later. This combination remained in service until 1892 when the 3040 Krag would replace it, along with the Springfield model 1892. When the U.S. Army kind of realized that black powder single-shot rifles were quickly being phased out and they should really start getting rid of them and try to keep up with the times. However, the round did remain in partial service in the Spanish-American War in 1898 and even served the 20th century in many different ways. But the 4570 reigned king for almost 20 years as the official military cartridge for the U.S. Army. And still reigns king today as a still hard-hitting, fun round to shoot. Some might even say that this is the cartridge that settled the West, given its time of service lines up pretty well with the near end of Native American U.S. Army conflict. Not the end of it, obviously. It went on for a long time, but the intensity of it kind of slowed down within the parameters of the 4570 being in action. So some would say it settled the West. But the 4570 also wasn't just a military round. It was also used quite a bit for bison hunting, along with a lot of the other rounds that we talked about, like the Sharps and the 5070, though it was kind of developed near the end of the bison wipeout or extinction, but it was still used quite a bit to hunt bison. The 405 to 500 grains of lead backed by 70 grains of black powder, while unfortunately did claim the lives of countless Native Americans and bison, truly is a symbol of historical U.S. firepower and manifest destiny of the 19th century. Now, both during and after its life as an official military cartridge, the 4570, as you very well know, had a very successful civilian life, maybe even more so than its military career. Especially with the creation of the Winchester Model 1886, the Marlin Model 1881, and the famed Marlin Model 1895. Civilians flocked to this cartridge in droves. In fact, whenever the U.S. military was getting rid of their surplus rifles, whenever they were switching over to the 30-40 Krag, they actually gave away a lot of the guns or sold them to Native Americans to be used as hunting guns. Even today, it's still extremely popular among hunters, cowboy action shooters, or just people who love lever actions. Hunters love it especially for its accuracy, stopping power, and energy retention. Because with the right load, this rifle can take down just about any big game animal in North America, and even within short to medium range, at least by our standards. And when going after smaller big game, like deer or something, it doesn't destroy all of your edible meat, again, as long as you're using the right load. People have even been known to take a 4570 to Africa to take down the African Big Five. While many cowboy action shooters and just general shooting enthusiasts who like to just shoot their guns love it for its variability in loads, because you can shoot subsonics or the hot rounds or whatever you want, and for its nostalgic content. I mean, how does this not give you nostalgia? The cartridge saw use just about everywhere in the US as soon as it came out, because as far as cartridges were concerned, it was at the top of the food chain and genuinely hard to beat when it came to a big bored rifle. From outlaws to lawmen, the 4570 was found in countless conflicts among men and almost couldn't be avoided for a good while. So before we get into the ballistics and dimensions of the cartridge, I'd like to go over the many different changes that were made to it in its short lifespan as a military cartridge, because there was a lot. Starting with the 1874 internally Bennett primed 95.5 copper zinc alloy cased version. That 95.5 copper zinc alloy is also known as Bloomberg gliding metal and was used for quite a while before we actually got to brass. We're getting there. So like I said, it was internally Bennett prime, which means it looked like a rimfire. It wasn't, but it looked like a rimfire as far as the back was concerned. And unfortunately, the rifle and carbine loads were not stamped on the cartridges. So as soon as you got them out of the package, you couldn't tell which was which. And that matters, because the cartridge, or the carbine version, was technically a 45-55 405, and the rifle version was a 45-70 405. And I've heard loading a rifle cartridge into a carbine is not a nice thing to accidentally do. Later in 1877, they would add head stamps to identify the date of manufacture, the manufacturer themselves, and the load type, so that you didn't have to guess. Rifle loads featuring an R on the head stamp, and carbine loads featuring a C. While yes, this was one of the very first designs of the 4570, it most certainly was not the last, because we have several more to go. Now in 1880, they conducted an experiment to improve the long-range performance of the cartridge by extending the case to 2.4 inches instead of the 2.1, loading a 500 grain bullet, or 505 grain bullet, and adding 10 more grains of black powder, making it 80 grains of black powder, as well as using a reloadable boxer primer. Now, the boxer primer is the only thing that stuck here, just a little spoiler. These cartridges were used in modified Springfield Model 1881 long-range rifles, and tested alongside the original Springfield, the original Springfield with the original 2.1 inch case, but with a 500 grain bullet, because I guess they wanted to have a control kind of. In the end, it was determined that the heavier bullet was what gave it better long-range accuracy over the extra 10 grains of black powder. So this ended the experiment with the elongated cases, and they officially started loading all the rifle loads with 500 grain slugs instead of the 405. Though the carbine loads would stick with the original 405, because carbines aren't really made for long range. However, in 1886, they discontinued the head stamp R and C, because now you could just tell the difference by looking at them. The rifle loads were now using the longer and heavier 505 grain bullets, and the carbines were still using the 405. So now you could just look at them and tell rifle, carbine. So now there was no more reason for anybody to lose their shoulder unannounced because there was no R or C on the back of your cartridge. Now, as early as 1882, Frankfurt Arsenal was experimenting with a new three-piece design that was patented by George W. Morse, known as the Morse pattern. Go figure. These rounds consisted of a tube, the hull, a head, which consisted of the primer and anvil, and a rubber seal to hold the head in place, kind of to hold it onto the tube. They also featured a tin-coated brass case as opposed to the copper or tin or copper zinc alloy that they were already using, or the Bloomfield gliding metal. Unfortunately, these rounds really weren't all that popular, so only about 140,000 of the 1 million ordered were ever actually produced. But in 1888, they had a fully tinned inside and out cartridge with a reloadable boxer primer became the new standard, calling it the pattern 1888. Now, the tinning of the brass case, I didn't mention it on the last one, but the tinning of the brass case kept the black powder from eating away at the brass, because we talked about it. Black powder is very, very nasty and not good at all, as well as keeping the mercury fulminate from also coming in contact with the brass, because it would also eat it away. Unfortunately, tests later showed that the tinning really only lasts like less than 4 years, so it was kind of hard to make these cartridges last that long unless you wanted to take all your old ones and go re-tin them. Now, you may be asking, why did they tin the inside and out if only the inside was what they wanted to keep from touching black powder? And the reason is just ease of manufacturing. Dipping the whole thing in tin is significantly easier than trying to just get the inside of it coated in tin. So that's pretty much the only reason the whole thing was tinned. It's as simple as that. And they continued producing this round all the way until 1898. Though the Army had already dropped it by 1895, it was still being produced for reserve and militia use. By early 1897, smokeless loads were now being tested and finally produced in 1898. Overlapping a bit with the pattern 1888, but officially being adopted with the 500 grain bullet and tinned brass case. Although this time they featured a cannelure about 0.7 inches from the mouth. Now, this cannelure was now to keep them from seating the bullet too low, because before we had smokeless loads, because smokeless loads take up significantly less space than black powder does. So before then, you just filled it all the way up. That's why we kept having to extend cases. You just filled it all the way up, and then you shove the bullet in there right on top of it, usually with a wad on top of it or something. You just shove it right on top of it, and that was your seat depth. You didn't have to worry about seat depth. You just had this much powder, so you could put it in that deep. But once we came out with the smokeless loads, we couldn't do that anymore. We had to somehow figure out our seat depth and figure out what was actually right without having the black powder there to just stop the bullet on the way in. So they came out with the cannelure, which again was about 0.7 inches from the mouth of the bullet. Now, they did make some changes to the bullet itself, but they were fairly minor. Really just a little bit of changes to the lube grooves and the recessed base, but that's really about it. Eventually, this round was produced commercially, and though Frankfurt Arsenal only produced about 160,000 of the exact specifications I just gave you, eventually about 7 million were produced, though lacking the tinning that we just talked about, because now we had smokeless powder, which doesn't destroy your brass, so you didn't need it. Then in 1899, a new tin-jacketed 500 grain bullet was adopted, called the Model 1898 Jacketed, and they received an order of about 8 million units from Union Metal Cartridge Company and Winchester Repeating Arms. Though it seems very little of this order was actually produced, because they were issuing cadets and reserve units with 30-40 Krags, which usually they would give them the surplus stuff, but they were even giving them 30-40 Krags, so I guess they just didn't want the 45-70 anymore. In fact, the most recent government contract for 45-70 rounds was in 1917 for 500,000 units by a man named Francis Bannerman. So it's been a minute since we actually ordered 45-70. Additionally, the Ordnance Department would actually order that the carbine loads not be loaded with the smokeless loads and just be loaded with the old black powder like they were using before, until they were discontinued in 1905, which I find weird. Why wouldn't you want the new, updated, better powder in your cartridges? It's probably lighter. Should have looked into that. It's almost definitely lighter. It's more efficient, less smoke. I don't understand why you would do that. Now, there were several different blank loads that were developed throughout the years, and the one I find most interesting was the one that they used for line throwing guns. And these line throwing guns were used for, you guessed it, throwing a line from one ship to the other. And they did this by using a weird gun that was like chopped off at the front. You'll see, I'll put a picture right here. And what they would do is they would use rifle blanks to give it the oomph that it needed to toss it all the way over there, because they could do it a lot better with the blank than they could shucking it over there. And what's actually really cool is we basically use this same thing nowadays, but with a significantly more upgraded apparatus. I've even heard that we still use the 4570 blanks, but I couldn't really find whether that was true or not, so I'm really not too sure on that. But we do use the same type of thing, essentially. It's just better because we've gotten better. Now finally, let's get to the dimensions and ballistics. The 4570 dimensions are as follows. The bullet was a .458 inch lead slug. The case length was about 2.1 inches. First copper alloy or Bloomfield gliding metal, and then eventually tin brass, and then eventually brass, or drawn brass. The neck diameter was .480 inches. The base diameter was .505 inches, and the rim diameter was .608 inches. And then an overall length of 2.5 inches. Original ballistics varied from bullet type and load type, but we had the 405 grain rifle version moving around 1,350 feet per second and sitting at about 1,640 foot-pounds of energy. We had the 500 grain rifle load moving at around 1,315 feet per second with a very impressive 1,920 foot-pounds of energy. And finally, we had the 405 grain carbine load, which, like we talked about, is technically a 45, 55, 405, but it's using the same case and kind of the same bullet, so we're just going to call it a 4570. But nonetheless, it was moving at around 1,150 feet per second, delivering around 1,190 foot-pounds of energy. Another cool side note is that the 405 grain version of the rifle load was able to penetrate 7.3 inches of white pine at 700 yards, which to me is pretty insane. I don't know if that's like normal for, I don't know a lot of things, but that sounds like a lot for 700 yards, especially with a 45-70. I mean, it's a straight wall cartridge. Anyway, that's besides the point. Making it truly a hard hitter wherever and whenever you need it to be, within reason, of course. Now, last but not least, I'm going to go over the modern ballistics and loadability, and then we are going to cut it off here and save the rest for part 2, because I want to split this up into 2 parts because it's a very long video. Now, in the modern day, we have an ungodly amount of variation in this round. We have the option of bullet weights ranging from like 300 to 730 grains. We're able to achieve velocities of anywhere from subsonic, sub 1170 feet per second. That's the speed of sound. For those of you that don't know, that's what subsonic means. It's slower than the speed of sound. For those of you that don't know, I know a lot of you do know that. Anyway, to some screaming 2,200 feet per second monster loads that are really just made for our modern rifles that can handle that kind of load. Don't go trying to shoot one of those loads out of a 1873 Springfield trapdoor. You're going to get hurt. Do not do that at all. And while no, that's not exactly crazy as far as the modern world is concerned, it is crazy to consider the fact that it started at like, 1,500 feet per second or less, and now we're getting it past 2,000 feet per second. Wild. Now, I have heard some reports that you do begin to lose some of your accuracy when you surpass the 1,500 feet per second mark. I don't know if that's true. I've heard that from people that do their own loads, but just keep that in mind when you're doing your own loads. Even from the factory, we have a plethora of 4570 options. I mean, I think Midway USA alone has 44 different options between different brands and load types. That's a lot. That's a lot of different loads. But anyway, folks, that's about it for today for the 4570. This is part 1. Next week, we will be getting into part 2, where we're going to go over the rifle it was made for, other rifles that were eventually made for it and made popular, historical figures that have used it, like Custer, different uses in media, like movies and stuff, and just kind of our final thoughts about it. I don't know if this is going to bother anybody that I'm doing this in 2 parts. I'm just kind of experimenting, seeing what people like, what people don't like, because I'm still kind of trying to get my footing for this channel. I think I've only done like 12 videos so far, But it's been going really well. I really appreciate all the support I've ever gotten from y'all. I'm at 1,427 subscribers. That's crazy. That's awesome. That's so cool, and I appreciate you guys so much. So until then, keep your powder dry and your brass polished, and we'll catch y'all next time. Thank you.